Hi, class. I want to talk just a little bit more about relationships and highlight what's happening in chapter 9. There are two economic approaches to relationships that your text doesn't really elaborate too much on. Might call them a little bit different things, but one is the equity theory. And I've been listening to a podcast from one of my faves, Brene Brown, and I want to share with you what she thinks about one of these. It's called the equity theory. And the equity theory is that your required rewards to cost should be proportionate to your partner or friend's rewards to costs. Now remember our second unit on perception. All of this is based on your perception of what your rewards to costs are. Because some people give a whole lot and they think that their cost isn't that much. It's all about personal perception of these things. But the thought is that you should be giving and getting that's Murphy. You should be giving and getting proportionately to your partner or friend. And if not, then you will perceive inequity and equity, and you'll probably leave that relationship at some point. But I want to share with you what Brene Brown says about equity.
One of the worst myths in the world, and that is the myth that strong, lasting relationships are always 50-50. I call BS. That is not the case. Strong, lasting relationships are rarely 50-50 because life does not work that way. Strong, lasting relationships happen when your partner or friend or whoever you're in a relationship with can pony up that 80% when you are down to 20, and that your partner also knows that when things fall apart for her and she only has 10% to give, you can show up with your 90, even if it's for a limited amount of time. Let me tell you where this starts.
I like it when people call BS on theories, so I want to share an opposing viewpoint. I kind of side with Brene on that. The second economic approach to relationships is the social exchange theory. And the formula of that, if you are an analytical person, if you're an accounting type person, the formula for this is that rewards minus costs equal profits. Again, it's your perception of what is a reward of this relationship. So sometimes a reward of a relationship would be that you have support when needed. So let's say that you have a friend who will check on you when you're sick. That is a reward. You have someone with whom you can confide things when you need to get an alternative opinion on something. Share good news. That's a reward when you have that in a relationship. A reward could also be that your friend has access to fun things, like maybe tickets to concerts or Cardinal season tickets, something like that. Boy, wouldn't that be nice? And then what you have to do is you have to factor out the cost of that relationship. And maybe the cost would be that your friend talks all the time or calls you at random hours and needs rides and things like that. And you have to subtract that from what you get from that relationship. And then you get this sum at the end. The hope is that that is a positive number when you subtract your costs from your rewards. But let's say that it's not. Sometimes if it's not, you start looking around. And there are a couple reasons why people might stay in inequitable relationships. And that might be your alternatives at the time. You know, when you think about jobs, people put up with a lot of lesser jobs. They may be underemployed. That means that they're not working at whatever level they've been educated for. When the economy's bad, you might put up with more in a job because your comparison level for alternatives is not very good. The other thing we look at in this economic approach is your comparison level in general. And that is something often that you were reared into. So maybe you're comparing, it's what you expected the relationship to be, what you expected a friendship to be. If you expected a friendship to be work, when it turns into work, you're not surprised. If you expected a relationship to be happily ever after because you read a lot of fairy tales when you were a kid and it happens to be work, then that doesn't meet your comparison level. That's not your expectation of what it was supposed to be like. No one told me there were going to be days like this, that kind of thought. And you might be quicker to exit at that time because your thought was that it was going to be fun and that you expected relationships to be easy and light. And when they turn to be heavy and sometimes sad and depressing, then you're out of there. So that is an economic approach to relationships. Now, when we're thinking about relationships, we have to think about, oftentimes there's this word that we try to sometimes skirt around. Sometimes we're not very comfortable with it. And if we were in class at this time, I would put it on the board and I would say, I want you to tell me how you feel here in your stomach and here in your heart and here in your brain when you hear the word conflict. Does that make you shudder? Does that make you think, I don't want any part of that? Does it make you want to run and be avoidant? Or does that make you want to put on your boxing gloves and say, bring it? Or are you kind of in the middle on conflict? Well, this is how I define conflict. So it's similar to how your authors do, it's a little bit different. It's an expressed struggle between at least two interdependent parties who perceive one of three things. And these are scarce rewards, incompatible goals, or interference with their goals. So let me just go quickly through that. It needs to be expressed. When you have a problem with your neighbor because they're leaving their garbage cans in front of your driveway, but you don't say anything to your neighbor, that is not an expressed struggle. That is an intrapersonal conflict because you don't have the guts to go knock on their door and say, excuse me, could you just move them over just a little bit so that I can back out easily? So that doesn't meet this definition. Interpersonal conflict has to be expressed. It needs to be expressed verbally, not just rolling your eyes kind of stuff. And then the scarce reward part is, let's think about things that are scarce. Generally, we feel like time and money are scarce. That's what a lot of people's conflicts and relationships circle around, is we don't have enough money to do everything that we want, and we're short on time. And the time that you spend at work or the time that you spend with your friends takes away from the time and energy that you have for me. So that is often a source of conflict. The second one, and I think these two, number 2 and 3, kind of are confusing because they seem to be similar. One is incompatible goals. So let's say that I'm in a relationship with someone, I want kids and they don't. That's kind of incompatible. You can't compromise on that. You can't rent kids for the weekend. You can't have half a kid. So you have to have conversations about this. You have to look at your benefits and costs of doing this. You have to look at, am I okay in being in a relationship that doesn't want this? And can I find my fulfillment in other ways, whether it be being a big brother, big sister, or something like that. Interference in goal completion is different than that. It doesn't mean that we don't have the same goal, but it's just the getting to that goal achievement that's different. I'll give you an example. Let's say that you want to go back to school. And let's say that your partner wants you to go back to school because getting an advanced degree is going to get you more money every month from your employer. However, the fact that you have to study all the time and that you never have time for me, that's what we fight about. We don't fight about the fact that you're getting an advanced degree. I mean, I'm all about that. Make more money. Be fulfilled in your career. But the fact that that is costing you every weekend and every available free time that we used to get to spend together, that's what we have conflict over. So when we look at some of what your textbook suggests for relational maintenance strategies, one is to embrace your agency. And what we mean by agency is the fact that you are an active participant in this relationship. Conflict is not something that happens to you. It's something that you engage in. And if engaged in properly, it doesn't have to be a negative thing. I think a lot of people hear the word conflict and they think, fight, disagreement. And it's probably because we don't do it correctly. There's a lot of residue after conflict. Sometimes there are things that we say and we know that we cannot unsay things. And so then we have to apologize. And even when we apologize, that doesn't take away the original transgression. So we know that happens. But let's talk a little bit about some of this management of interpersonal conflict. There are some benefits to go into my neighbors and saying, could you please move your trash cans? The fact of the matter is they might easily say, I had no idea that was a problem, and do it. And so then you can back out of your driveway freely. Another thing to resolving conflict is that it can be cathartic. There is some research to suggest that women live longer than men, even still. And I wonder if that's because a lot of times we want to talk about things and sometimes our partners don't. And so getting that conflict out can be stress relieving. It also can energize a relationship. It's depending on how you do it. This is what I really want to say. So there are 6 conflict styles that are approached in your book, and the TED Talk talks a little bit about some of those. So I want you to look at all those. But I want to think about this thought of compromise, because I think that a lot of us are taught that compromise is the way to handle conflict in a relationship. And technically, it's not necessarily the optimal way, because compromise, if you economically look at what a compromise is, it's a lose-lose proposition, because conflict or compromise involves you giving up part of your original goal and meeting someone in the middle. So let's say that you went in to negotiate for a $10,000 raise and your employer didn't want to give you any raise. And so you agreed at a $5,000 raise. Well, you could call that a win because you got a raise, but technically you didn't get the raise you wanted. And so that's a loss. Your employer could consider that a loss because they didn't want to give you anything, but technically they didn't want to lose you. And so by giving you something, that was a little bit of a win, but it was still by ways of looking at it, they had to give what they didn't want to give. So neither of you got exactly what you set out to get. Again, it's the perception of that is what you take away in terms of whether that was a resolved conflict or not, that was resolved in a positive way or not, based on your perception of whether $5,000 was enough or too much or those kind of things. So a win-win approach, collaboratively getting through a situation, is considered optimal. So when you can both get what your original goal was, and it's hard to think about that. I always go back to that story of the corn, and I think I shared that with you at one point, where this guy was winning all these awards for his corn, and as our reporter went out to do the story, and what she found was that his secret to success was to give his neighbors award-winning corn also. And you think, well, why wouldn't they win the contest then? But he said, you have to know something about corn. Corn cross-pollinates with other corn. And so if it's surrounded by lesser corn, it's not ever going to be as good. And that's win-win. That's when you can give some of your secrets away and still be a winner by empowering others to be winners too. Because it's not a scarcity approach that one of us has to win at the expense of the other. Sometimes we can negotiate things like getting that extra degree for your family, that by doing maybe some of your, or having one night that you don't do homework, and then every other night where I don't bother you because you are doing homework, that we can negotiate a path where we're collaborating to get you that advanced degree in a way that's not so detrimental to our family and the sustainability of a relationship long term. So there's a whole lot more in chapter 9. Read it. Go ahead and watch those TED Talks. I hope you find those meaningful. Remember, any TED Talk that I put in a unit can't be used for your TED Talk review, but I did give you some other examples. And Brene Brown, who you heard her podcast, I put her TED Talk on there too. So that might be one, if you liked that, that you might want to check out. So I know that you have a lot of time to practice this relationship stuff in your families right now. And I hope you take that opportunity of sheltering in place to improve your communication with each other. See ya.